In November 2022, it seemed like the nightmare was finally over. A brutal 2-year civil war in Ethiopia's Tigray region, a conflict that killed as many as 600,000 people and forced millions from their homes, was declared finished. The Pretoria peace agreement, brokered by the African Union, promised to permanently silence the guns. It was a moment of hope, a chance to rebuild from a war defined by horrific atrocities and a devastating humanitarian crisis. But today, that promise is on life support. The peace is fragile, progress has stalled, and the agreement itself is cracking under the pressure of broken promises and new conflicts. Key parts of the deal have been ignored. Foreign troops who committed atrocities are still on Tigrayan soil, and the region's own leadership is tearing itself apart. The drumbeat of war is growing louder again, with troops massing on borders and threats echoing across the Horn of Africa. So, is Ethiopia's fragile peace about to shatter? Is the nation about to plunge back into a war that could be even more complex and dangerous than the last one? Let's break down the three critical factors pushing the region back to the brink. To understand the danger of today, you have to understand the horror of the recent past. The war that broke out in November 2020 was a catastrophe. For 2 years, federal Ethiopian forces, allied with troops from neighboring Eritrea and regional Amhara militias, fought against the Tigray People's Liberation Front, or TPLF. The result was a human tragedy. An estimated 600,000 people died, not just from bullets, but from the starvation and disease that came with the fighting. The war was marked by civilian massacres, widespread sexual violence used as a weapon, and the deliberate destruction of hospitals, schools, and farms. Nearly 1 million people were forced from their homes, and many are still living in camps today. By late 2022, everyone was exhausted. This mutual exhaustion, more than any real political breakthrough, is what led to the peace talks in South Africa. The Pretoria Agreement that came out of it was built on a few key promises. First, the fighting had to stop, immediately and permanently. Second, Tigrayan fighters had to disarm, demobilize, and reintegrate into society, a process known as DDR. This was a core demand from the federal government. Third, all foreign and non-federal forces had to get out of Tigray. This was a deal-breaker for the Tigrayan side, aimed squarely at the Eritrean army and Amhara regional forces, who were accused of the worst atrocities. And fourth, federal authority had to be restored in Tigray. That meant bringing back basic services, allowing humanitarian aid, and setting up an interim regional administration to govern until elections could be held. For a moment, it looked like it might work. The fighting stopped and aid started to flow. But peace is so much more than just the absence of war. And as the ink dried, it became clear that the hardest part, actually doing what the deal said, was where it would all start to fall apart. The first and biggest reason the peace is failing is the deal itself. Many of its most critical parts have been ignored, violated, or only partially implemented. This has destroyed trust and created a security crisis where returning to war feels almost logical. The main standoff is about disarmament versus withdrawal. The agreement says Tigrayan forces have to give up their weapons. But the TPLF is unwilling to hand over all its guns while the armies that invaded its land, Eritrean troops and Amhara militias, are still occupying large parts of Tigrayan territory. From their perspective, disarming while hostile forces are on your soil isn't peace, it's suicide. They argue the federal government hasn't held up its end of the bargain by failing to force those groups out. The Ethiopian military, in turn, accuses the TPLF of cheating the deal by hiding weapons and refusing to fully demobilize, seeing it as preparation for another war. This is most intense in contested areas, especially western Tigray, fertile lands claimed by both Amhara and Tigray. Amhara forces seized this territory during the war, and despite the peace deal, they're still there. For Tigray, getting that land back and returning the hundreds of thousands who were ethnically cleansed from it is essential. For many in Amhara who have deep historical claims, giving it up is unthinkable. The federal government, caught in the middle and fighting its own violent insurgency in the Amhara region, has been unable or unwilling to force the issue. This has left nearly 1 million Tigrayans internally displaced. While some have managed to return to certain areas, the vast majority, especially from western Tigray, are still stuck in limbo, unable to go home. It's a wound that's constantly infected. On top of this, there has been almost no transitional justice. The war was filled with documented atrocities, but there's been no credible independent process to hold anyone accountable. Victims have seen no justice, and perpetrators have faced no consequences. You can't build trust when people who committed horrific crimes are still in power, or in the case of foreign troops, are still occupying the very land they terrorized. Without justice, the anger that started the first war is left to smolder, ready to catch fire again. The peace deal stopped the killing, but it hasn't delivered security, justice, or land, making it a broken pact in the eyes of many Tigrayans. The second threat to the peace comes from outside actors, especially Ethiopia's northern neighbor, Eritrea. To understand Eritrea's role, you have to understand its leader, President Isaias Afwerki, and his long-running personal hatred for the TPLF. When the TPLF dominated Ethiopia's government, it was Eritrea's #1 enemy. When Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed took power in Ethiopia and made peace with Eritrea in 2018, the two leaders bonded over their shared enemy, the TPLF. Eritrean forces were key allies for Abiy in the war, but their goal was never just about helping Ethiopia. It was, and still is, to permanently destroy the TPLF as a military and political force. This is why the Pretoria peace deal was a disaster for Eritrea. It wasn't part of the agreement, and any deal that let the TPLF survive was unacceptable. So, while the deal said all foreign forces had to leave, Eritrean troops never fully did. They've kept a presence in border areas inside Tigray, occupying Ethiopian territory. This serves multiple purposes for President Afwerki. It gives him a buffer zone, projects power, and lets him meddle in Tigray's affairs. There are credible reports that Eritrea is actively supporting hardline factions in Tigray who oppose the peace deal, trying to keep the region weak and divided. Now, this explosive situation has a new fuse: Ethiopia's public demand for access to the sea. Ethiopia is the world's most populous landlocked country, and Prime Minister Abiy has started arguing that a port on the Red Sea is an existential national interest. This rhetoric is aimed directly at Eritrea and its ports. While Abiy says he prefers a peaceful deal, his government hasn't ruled out using force. This has set off alarm bells in Eritrea's capital, Asmara. President Afwerki has called the idea the work of a crazy person and accused Ethiopia of planning an invasion. Both countries have reportedly moved troops to the border. This standoff creates a terrifying new dynamic. Ethiopia's port ambitions have turned its wartime ally back into a bitter rival. It raises the possibility of not just a direct war between the two countries, but a proxy war fought inside Tigray. Eritrea could use its allies within Tigray to tie Ethiopia down, while Ethiopia might see a friendly Tigray as essential for any move on Eritrea. Once again, Tigray is caught in the middle of a power struggle, its stability held hostage by the clashing goals of Addis Ababa and Asmara. The third, and most tragic, reason for the potential collapse is what's happening from within. The leadership that guided Tigray through the war is now violently divided against itself. The TPLF has been torn apart by a bitter power struggle, creating a vacuum that is crippling the region and inviting outsiders to interfere. The split pits two main factions against each other. On one side is the TPLF's longtime chairman, Debretsion Gebremichael, representing the party's old guard. On the other is the faction around Getachew Reda, who led the peace negotiations and was then appointed head of the Tigray Interim Regional Administration, Tigray. The split started with the peace deal itself. Debretsion's side argues that Getachew's team gave away too much and sold out Tigray's core interests, like the fate of occupied territories. They see his administration as too cozy with the federal government. Getachew's allies, on the other hand, call themselves pragmatists trying to implement the deal and open up Tigray's political space. They accuse the old guard of being spoilers, blocking the peace process just to hang on to power. What started as a political fight turned violent in late 2024 and early 2025. Factions loyal to Debrecen reportedly seized government offices, leading to armed clashes and deaths. This conflict paralyzed the interim government. The federal government, seeing its partner Getachew being undermined, struck back. In May 2025, Ethiopia's National Electoral Board officially revoked the TPLF's legal status as a political party, a move the TPLF called a major threat to peace. The federal government then backed Getachew in forming a new rival party, making the split even deeper. After months of chaos, Getachew was replaced as interim president in April 2025 by General Tadesse Werde in an attempt to stabilize things, but the deep divisions are still there. This internal fracture is a catastrophe for Tigray. A divided leadership can't advocate for the region's interests. It can't present a united front against threats from Eritrea or negotiate effectively with the federal government. It stalls all reconstruction, leaving a population already battered by war and a worsening drought in a state of crisis. And most dangerously, it creates a power vacuum that actors like Eritrea are happy to exploit, fanning the flames of internal conflict to serve their own goals. So where does this leave us? The 2022 Pretoria Agreement stopped the full-scale war, but it didn't solve the political problems that started it. It created a negative peace, an absence of war, but not a positive, lasting one. Today, a perfect storm is gathering. A broken peace deal has left deep wounds over territory and justice wide open. A dangerous regional rivalry sparked by Ethiopia's quest for a port has turned former allies into enemies who seem to be preparing for another fight. And a bitter internal power struggle has left Tigray leaderless and vulnerable, a house divided against itself. While nobody may want to pay the immense cost of another full-scale war, the stage is set for more localized clashes, proxy fights, and a level of instability that could easily spiral out of control. The peace is on life support. With the agreement failing, armed groups refusing to stand down, and a humanitarian crisis getting worse by the day, the question isn't if the peace will hold, but what will be the spark that sets the region on fire once more. If you found this breakdown helpful, please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel. And let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Understanding these complex situations is the first step toward advocating for a lasting peace. Thanks for watching.